Hey, what's going on, everyone? We're going to do a Glissen follow-up review. So for those who may have seen the previous Glissen experiment, when I was doing that and when I was editing that video a couple of days ago, some new information came out. And of course, I wanted to do another experiment regarding photon blast, but this also gave me some other information that gave insights into some of the things I was seeing in my previous experiment and some of the things that I didn't get 100% correct. So of course, with this new information, wanted to do some new experiments and really see what was going on with elemental weapons, especially with Tector, because there are some things going on that are different from other weapons. So of course, feel free to check out that video. I'll leave it up in the top right corner and also down in the description. But this video by itself really doesn't need that, so I'm not going to force you to see that, just so things catch up. So we're going to revisit Glissen. We're going to understand how Glissen and Photonic Furies or wand element explosions interact. And then we're also going to get into some of the secrets, and I use secrets quote unquote, of the skill wand element Revoke, which right now is kind of a mystery in its use. And I would say a common belief is that it's not useful. We'll see how that plays out once we have a better understanding of what's going on with elemental weapons and how it interacts with Tector. Before we get into those video clips where I show you what's going on, let's talk about Glissen weapons again. Looking at this new data that you can see on the screen, and what you're seeing here is data pulled from the data mine on how wand works when it comes to photon blasts, physical down accumulation, and element accumulation. I won't get into the photon blast because I'm going to save that for another video that I was actually putting together before I decided to do this and the results that I got from my experiment. But essentially what you can see is wand attacks have both physical and elemental down accumulation. And this is no different from any other weapon. When we start looking at Glissen, the element weapon, it actually doesn't change the physical down accumulation of a wand. So if we look at step attack, it does 35 physical down. If you were to use Glissen or the lightning wand, it gives an additional 6.2. This is important because what we're seeing here is that even though Glissen is the lightning wand, it does not make the primary attack lightning when it comes to down accumulation. It just adds lightning to it. Now, this is where things get interesting with Glissen. You'll see in the notes that a step attack or a normal attack creates a Photonic Fury. Photonic Furies is another way of saying wand explosions. Now, if you weren't using Glissen and you didn't cast the technique, your Photonic Furies would be what we believe as physical. And of course, if you were to charge the technique, let's say Barda, your Photonic Fury would then be ice. Glissen overrides that. And so that was one of the things that I didn't realize, which was impacting, well, not necessarily impacting, but was the reason why we were getting some of the results that we got in that previous Glissen experiment video. Even though I did not have Photonic Fury Lightning active, because I was using a lightning wand, its normal Photonic Furies get overwritten and they become lightning. This is very important, as we're going to see in these next runs, because essentially the reason why I was getting such fast elemental downs was not because my regular attacks were becoming lightning. It was that my Photonic Furies were naturally lightning. And so when I compared lightning Photonic Fury versus non-element, or what I believe to be physical Photonic Furies, that was not the case. It doesn't matter if you have lightning or physical, they become the same with elemental weapons. As we'll see coming up shortly, this changes when you change the element to, let's say, ice or fire. Because what will happen is, now you have an element Photonic Fury, the wand or Glissen will not override that, and the element will become that element, which has a lot of consequences. Specifically, you will not be as effective as causing a shock. But we also understand what's going on with the Glissen potential itself, as you'll see in this next image. Glissen, every time it procs, which is every 30 seconds, that will always give 300 elemental down, specifically 300 lightning elemental down. Regardless if you're using wand or sword or any other weapon, the Glissen potential is always going to do a lightning proc. This was one of the reasons as to why, when I was looking at sword in the experiment, I didn't shock Didal. I used Didal as my test dummy, essentially. It didn't happen until later in the fight, pretty much right when he was about to die. And that is because, one, sword is still primarily physical when it comes to its down accumulation. Like the wand, it gets a little bit, which is about, could be, I think, 1/10 of its physical down accumulation as element down accumulation. So even though you're using a lightning sword, it's not giving you as much lightning down accumulation as you might think. It's just giving you a little bit as an additional benefit. So what essentially was happening was when I did shock Didal later in the fight, right before he died, that was most likely due to all of the Glissen potential procs that I had built up over the course of that 4-minute fight. This is going to get very, very interesting, as we'll see, and as we'll discuss of how this interacts with other things. And so without further ado, let's get further into the experiment and see how all of these things play out. So what did these 3 runs show us? 1, it showed us that the physical explosions that you naturally get with wand don't seem to play a role in physical downs. Physical downs are primarily based on the wand attacks in and of itself. Glissen, the elemental weapon, does override Photonic Fury when there is no element. When there is an element, that element, in this case ice, overrides Glissen. So once again, Glissen overrides the wand and the natural Photonic Fury. If you charge a technique such as Barda, that element will override the Glissen properties. This is very important because, as we saw in this run, the wand element, if it is not lightning, will also reduce your ability to shock the enemy. Now, is it outright going to stop it? No. What's happening is that the Glissen potential, that proc, will provide lightning elemental down. So you can still get shocked, but it's going to take many of those procs to emerge. Wand element and Photonic Fury, when it is not lightning, or if it's not just in its base form, it will not provide shock. It would provide ice or freeze. But in this case, Didal is not weak to freeze during this anniversary event. Now, this has a lot of consequences for wand, especially wand element Revoke. because originally one of my theories was that you would want to remove the element to do more physical downs. I believe what we can see here in some other experiments that I've done, that is not the case. What is the case is that you want to remove an element when you are wielding elemental weapons. As in this case, Glissen or lightning, anything that is not lightning element when it comes to Photonic Fury is going to be a detriment to the overall capabilities of the wand. So you can imagine in situations if you have more of a hybrid play where you are casting techniques in addition to your wand attacks, there might be situations where using Barter Blot or using Zondi Clad is more effective, even though that element might not be the weakness of that particular enemy. But you still want to get that off because it's best for that situation. What Wand Element Revoke essentially does is say, hey, I'm using an elemental weapon, get me back to that weapon's element, get those Photonic Furies back to lightning in this case. And so it essentially creates a quick way of removing it so that you can go back and forth with techniques without a detriment. As we see in this case against Didal, having ice, I never froze the target, and that effectively made my run approximately 30 seconds slower than the other two. Of course, when it came to physical downs, it was actually faster, but when we look at the times, we can definitely say that's due to random factors and variability, and if we were to roll the dice again, the order in which these three runs stun Didal could be different. Back to Wand Element Revoke. Right now, it might not seem as beneficial or useful because once again, this game is only about a month and a half, 2 months old now. So things are going to progress. And I think it's very, very important that we understand how exactly not only element weapons are working, but how Wand Element Revoke seems to be designed. So once things do start coming out, we get more techniques, we get more weapons, we start understanding these mechanics. We can imagine a situation to where Xanverse, a win technique, and for those who might not be familiar, in PSO2, Xanverse was an AoE technique. It would do 20% of the damage captured within that AoE as win damage. You can imagine if they were to implement that into NGS, kind of like Barter Blot or Zondi Clad, so it takes time to build up. You might be casting win techniques, building that up, and then you would do a charged win technique or whatever it might be to release Xanverse. That would change the element of your wand potentially. Let's say you were using Glissen. So now Wand Element Revoke allows you to not only use Xanverse effectively, but then immediately switch back to the element where you were doing your most damage, or the damage that's most effective against that target, versus having to not only waste PP, but also waste time in charging another fire tech to get that fire Photonic Fury back. Once again, element weapons override the base state of the wand, so if you don't have an element, that Photonic Fury is going to be whatever element that wand is. So essentially it allows you to skip some steps. Is it a necessity? No, you can spend the PP, you can spend that additional time, but you can start seeing how you can weave in different techniques, use things like Barter Blot, Zondi Clad, potentially Xanverse, without losing time, and it's more smooth. So whatever technique or whatever skill best fits the situation, you'll be able to use that effectively and not hurt yourself when it comes to managing your wand element. Hopefully that was informative. I know this was a revisit on Glissen, and we did some experiments a couple of days ago. And as I was doing these other experiments looking at Photon Blast, given the information that came out after I recorded that previous video, definitely gives us some insights onto what is going on with elemental weapons, especially with Tector, because things are different with wands than they are with other weapons. And so I think it's very good for us to understand that, whether we use it now, but in the future, when things become more accessible, when we have more options, really understanding how to take advantage of these things and not just discarding them because in current state, they aren't as useful, they aren't as effective. Other than that, hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time where we're going to be looking at Photon Blasts and how it interacts with Tector and its skills.